Our first presenter today is Kendall Marshman, who is an assistant professor of religion at the University of Georgia. His main focus of research is Pure Land Buddhism in Tang, China. He increasingly enjoys research on religious tourism, and he has a new chapter, Considering Tourism and Religion in Asian Cities, due in December in the edited volume Tourism in Asian Cities from Routledge Press. His paper today is Using Online Travel Reviews to Understand Religious Places, Thank you, Kendall.
All right, let me share my screen here. Are we good? There we go. Okay. All right, so thank you very much, Katie, for the introduction, and to the rest of the steering committee for their transparency and flexibility negotiating this unique edition of AAR. Also, thanks to the audience out there, either now or watching the recording later. I look forward to hearing from you during the Q&A or through later contact. So welcome to my home office, where a bearded Michael Stipe is always there, looking over your shoulder, providing gentle encouragement. This presentation actually spun out of the one I gave last year for the Economics and Capitalism in the Study of Buddhism seminar. I'll bring some of that back toward the end of my presentation. I was taken aback by the amount of interest I received about the method I used for that research. So when I saw the Space, Place, and Religion unit were calling for a panel on methodologies, I was particularly excited to revisit this research. Okay, I want to start out by asking you to consider the last time you left an online review. I was interested in this myself, so I went to my Google profile and saw I've only done a single review for some tree work I had done last year. I can honestly say this review would not exist were it not for the company reaching out to me to request the review. There's been a lot of research conducted on online reviews, and it suggests that I'm not alone in not leaving a ton of reviews for products I purchase, the companies I hire, or the places I visit. And yet, as your inboxes and app notifications may attest, all of these businesses are desperate for your reviews. As we can see on the screen there, Google's letting me know that I will be rewarded for contributing reviews. It made me realize that although I'm not a particularly active reviewer on Google, Amazon, or Facebook, I'm a more active reviewer in other apps. So this may or may not be a good idea, but this is some of my Airbnb reviews and Uber reviews. And these are a couple of examples that are probably familiar to many of you. Whereas I almost never leave reviews in other venues, I think I've almost always left a review in these apps. When confronting that reality, I realized that the apps had not incentivized me through rewards necessarily, but through inclusion into that community. I want positive reviews from my Airbnb hosts and Uber drivers because I want future hosts and future drivers to consider letting me stay or picking me up, or just basically being nice to me. Again, the research on online reviews suggests that I'm not unique. Although there are a handful of super reviewers out there who leave feedback on each platform they use for all sorts of purchases and services, the far majority of users review only sporadically on a few platforms or apps. So like the two examples here, travel platforms seem to be particularly popular. This figure, borrowed from a recent article, shows how reviews for hotels, restaurants, and attractions are reported in a single region in Italy. There's clearly a cyclic pattern here that emerges with reviews peaking in the summer months, which are the travel season for most people, tapering off during the school year as well. However, the authors note that there's a local bump for the holiday season, even though it's hard to detect in the scope of this graph. Moreover, we can see that there's rapid growth in the number of reviews, and although there will be certainly a decline for the current year, the authors expect that the total reviews will continue to grow, though less quickly. Businesses, and definitely big businesses, but even small businesses, use this data in various ways. They learn about where they are excelling, where they're falling short, who they are attracting, and how they can attract desired demographics, and etc. This is why they want the review so badly. It's not just replacing the old word of mouth campaigns of the past, but it's giving them data to help them understand their target base. But why leave all the fun to big businesses? These gigantic data pools are publicly available on these platforms, and scholars from many different fields are beginning to notice. And so here's where I'll bring up a giant disclaimer. I'm not here to claim that this is cutting edge. I'm very thankful to the researchers who have been producing and leading the way in this area and who are far more capable than I am with this technology. I'm but a humble noob, to use some internet slang. I do think, however, that the emergence of user-friendly tools and methods now make it more feasible than ever for more scholars to join this endeavor and tailor it to their own research interest. So let's get going by imagining ourselves actually in Boston for a moment, where the weather actually looks pretty decent today, which is a surprise. Let's go specifically to the Old North Church, famous for using lanterns to signal information about the British military movements to other American revolutionaries across the Charles River. This is among the most famous landmarks in Boston, and you can see that users have left 665 reviews on Google, and that Google's quantitative metric system deems it an excellent destination based on those reviews. Around 200 or so of those reviews actually include text reviews rather than just a star rating. And these are also reviews in English. While it's not impossible to do this research in other languages, many of the programs and tools I'll be showing are optimized for English, unfortunately. Also, I could have used TripAdvisor for this, which has over 3,000 reviews, but given this is a side project and larger data pool requires more time and processing power, I decided to leave this particular project pretty simple, to be totally transparent. The first tool you'll need is a web scraper, and there are a number of free web scraping applications available. I'll give a shout out to a couple of folks in the UGA Digital Humanities Lab at this point, Emily McGinn and Caleb Crumley, for introducing me to these tools. Thank you, digital humanities folks and librarians out there. I use a web scraper plugin for Google Chrome. It's easy to install and has several helpful tutorials. And I'll be frank, this is the most technical aspect of this method. It takes a little time to get the hang of, but the tutorials are really helpful in negotiating that process. Once you scrape the data for your project and you save it to a file and you can start the analysis, this part is known as the text mining. And there are a number of different platforms and tools available. Given that I am a complete neophyte in this area, I chose Voyant Tools, which is really accessible. And all you need to do is upload your data file and play around with the tools it offers, which you can see are plentiful. So here's a screenshot of the dashboard you'll see once Voyant processes your data. And by the way, you can do this with any body of text. So you can stick your own articles in there, you can stick book manuscripts, and you can learn more about your own writing as well. So to get a sense of the dashboard here, we see on the upper left a word cloud. We see the actual text, body of text in the reader in the middle. The upper right will show you the trends based on where words are being used in certain parts of the document. The summary is on the bottom left. You can see that the top 5 words are history, church, tour, beautiful, and great when talking about the Old North Church. And then on the bottom right, I wanted to highlight on this screenshot in particular, the context screen, because this is very important in looking and deciding how users are using certain words. And it also it demonstrates, in this example, the noisiness of some of this data. So for instance, when I was looking through the data for Old North Church, I saw that the word ghouls and railroad and fallout are being used. And I was like, what is going on here that these words are popping up so much? And it turns out that the Old North Church is recreated in Fallout 4, a very popular video game, and that some of the some of the users are going to Google to review the digital Old North Church in the video game alongside the actual Old North Church in actual space. And again, I want to note here the most frequent word associated with the Old North Church in these reviews is, interestingly, not church, but history, which suggests that people are identifying it first as a historical place before a religious place. We'll get to more on that in a second here. Where text mining of online reviews really shines, in my opinion, is the comparison of places. So let's take a leisurely stroll down from Old North Church, southwest to through the Common and to the part of the Back Bay to Trinity Church. It's not a National Historic Landmark like Old North Church, but it's still a frequently touristed place in Boston. And interestingly, it has 400 or so more Google reviews, but in regard to the English text reviews, it's comparable at around 200. Here's the Voyant dashboard for Trinity. Again, we see the words history, church, beautiful appear in the top 5, just like Old North Church. But not surprisingly, history takes a back seat to the beauty of the church. One of the words that immediately stood out to me was mass. And again, I highlighted it there in the screenshot on the bottom right. where we can see the users in context talking about their religious practice at Trinity. This was not a featured item in the Old North Church. To help our comparison further, I made some word clouds to highlight how even this most basic tool is really illuminating in comparison. If we look at words associated with the history and the category of history, it's not surprising that Old North Church far outpaces Trinity. It's easier to see the bigger, more frequent words, so I've noted some of the smaller ones for you there, right? We can see them talking about Paul Revere, the landmark, the American Revolution, the British, and Paul Revere's ride, so on and so forth. Whereas for Trinity Church, it's really only talking about how it's a landmark, even though technically it's not a official Boston landmark. And we can see, again, the date of foundation, 1733, mentioned there. I thought about using beauty and aesthetics to highlight Trinity, but it's a little messy as a category to designate, though I do think Trinity comes out ahead in that category. So I decided to look at architecture. Here we can see that this is another category that sets these two locations apart. Users want to talk about the architectural features of Trinity far more than Old North. And so they're talking about the Romanesque architecture, the stained glass windows, the interior and the exterior of the building, and those features and styles like the organ that takes place there. Intriguingly, though, the category that separated both of these churches was religion. The individuals who visit these places clearly associate Trinity with religion and Old North with history. Again, if we look at Old North, the only kind of religious thing besides church is pews. And in the context of those reviews, individuals are actually talking about how the pews are apparently very interesting. I've never been to Old North Church, so I can't speak to that. But if we compare that to what we're seeing over at Trinity, people are talking about specific services, Mass, Christmas, how it makes them feel when they go there, spiritual, peaceful, the clergy, and so on and so forth. It's interesting because each location act as both historical and religious destinations at the same time. They overlap much more than they diverge. And the best demonstration of that, perhaps, is that reviewers clearly see both of these tourist sites in addition, as tourist sites. And so again, we can see the ways in which they're talking about guided tours, fees, shops, chocolate shops that are next door apparently to the Old North Church, whether or not they recommend going there. And so this way of thinking about these places as multiple belongings, historic, religious, tourist destinations, it segues me back to my presentation at the last AAR meeting, where I conducted a very similar analysis. I compared two revered national landmarks and Buddhist mountains, Mount Ume and Mount Wutai. But I wanted to complicate the analysis by adding a completely artificial tourist site called the Nanshan Scenic Area. It was built in 2004 by a private Chinese conglomerate. And the grounds feature a colossal Buddha statue. You can have your family name or motto engraved for the right price on the lotus throne of the Buddha there. It also has an active monastery on the grounds, in addition to a theme park and a recreation area. My expectations going in were that the online reviews of the two historic mountains would be head and shoulders above Nanshan, but I was proved wrong. So here are some of the word clouds that came out of this. Again, they're in Chinese, so I won't spend too much time here. But in actuality, reviewers didn't seem to mind the artifice. They didn't mind the relatively recent construction or its affiliation with a business at the Nanshan Park. And while text mining did show that reviewers were associating Buddhism slightly more with Mount Wutai, which is why I kind of placed it above the other two mountains, there really wasn't that much separation from the other two places. So to conclude here, I just want to briefly acknowledge a couple of things. I'm just scratching the surface with the utility of this method and these tools. There is so much more to do. In addition, I don't want to say a real scholar, but a real perhaps digital humanities individual who had a lot more experience would scrape and collect tens or hundreds of thousands of reviews in order to produce this research. So again, there's a lot more still to do here. Second, I think this method and these tools are especially useful during times like this, where we actually can't be in these physical places. Moreover, even when things return to normal, these tools offer a feasible, economical, sustainable alternative to a lot of the traditional methods of investigating and thinking about place. Of course, This tool is not perfect for every study, and I'll be happy to talk about more of those weaknesses or more of the bonuses. In addition, I have those Voyant dashboards hyperlinked that will actually take me to the dashboard if anyone's interested in seeing more of that. And I appreciate your time, and I look forward to our Q&A and the rest of our presentations. Thanks so much.